One of the most anticipated days here at the IMF World Bank Spring Meetings in Washington, D.C. was the policy agenda document presented by Kristalina Georgieva, the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund. Now, this comes just a couple days after the World Economic Outlook from the IMF that pretty much downgraded economic growth projections for the entire globe, especially the United States, as a result of trade tensions from tariffs. Now, speaking of tariffs, Kristalina Georgieva said that it is essential that the nations involved in these trade tensions douse them and come to an agreement because uncertainty brings with it a lot of chaos and a lot of economic turmoil.
First and most urgent, for countries to work constructively to resolve trade tensions as swiftly as possible, preserving openness and removing uncertainty. And we are urging them to do it swiftly because uncertainty is very costly. I cannot stress this strongly enough. Without certainty, businesses do not invest, households prefer to save rather than to spend, and this further weakens prospects for already weakened growth.
And then the moment everyone had been waiting for, Kristalina Georgieva addressing the concerns raised by U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. And as a reminder, here's what he said.
First, we must make the IMF again. The IMF's mission is to promote international monetary cooperation, facilitate the balanced growth of international trade, encourage economic growth, and discourage harmful policies like competitive exchange rate depreciation. These are crucially important functions to support the U.S. and global economies. Instead, the IMF has suffered from mission creep. The IMF was once unwavering in its mission of promoting global monetary cooperation and financial stability. Now it devotes disproportionate time and resources to work on climate change, gender, and social issues. These issues are not the IMF's mission.
Managing Director Georgieva acknowledged the critical importance of the United States to the IMF, also said that the IMF is fiscally prudent in the use of its funds, and said she looks forward to speaking with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent about the concerns that he raised.
I want to recognize Secretary Bessent's remarks yesterday, in which he laid out the U.S. administration's vision for the Bretton Woods institutions. The United States is our largest shareholder. And even more, the United States is the home of my colleagues and me. So, of course, we greatly value the voice of the United States. I very much appreciate Secretary Bessent's reiteration of the U.S. commitment to the fund and to its role. He raised a number of important issues and priorities for the institution that I look forward to discussing with the U.S. authorities and the membership as a whole. We will have opportunities to do so here, and we will also have opportunities to continue with our executive board as we carry out important policy reviews. The Comprehensive Surveillance Review, it will set our surveillance priorities for the next 5 years, and the review of program design and conditionality, which will carefully consider how our lending can best help countries address the low growth challenge and durably resolve balance of payment weaknesses.
It was then time for Q&A with the press, with the Managing Director of the IMF fielding regional questions from Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. The Africa question came from Arise News.
Rhoda Sadiri with Arise News. You mentioned this present tensions could disproportionately impact low-income countries, and I'm glad you mentioned the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, because my question is on Africa. You met with the Nigerian delegation earlier this week. What is the strategy or your advice for the African continent? As you've noted in the past, Africa is not a country, it's a continent, right? Egypt cut rates for the first time in 5 years 7 days ago. Prior to that, Ghana hiked its interest rate for the first time in almost 2 years. So at these tough times, what's your advice for the continent?
We have seen over the last years the African continent having some of the fastest growing economies. But we also have seen low-income countries primarily, and among them fragile, conflict-affected countries, falling further behind. And now this is a shock for the continent. The direct impact of tariffs on most of Africa, not on all of Africa, but on most of Africa, is relatively small. But the indirect impact is quite significant. Slowing global growth means that all other things equal, they would see a downgrade, and actually we have downgraded growth prospects for the continent. For the oil producers like Nigeria, falling oil prices create additional pressure on their budgets. On the other hand, for the oil importers, this is a breath of fresh air. In other words, as you indicated in your question, different countries face different challenges. If I were to come with some basic recommendations that apply to Africa, I would say, and actually they apply to Nigeria, they apply to Egypt, they apply to Ghana, they apply to Cote d'Ivoire. First, continue on a path of strengthening your fundamentals. There is still a lot that can be done on the fiscal side to have strength, as I was talking about ASEAN, to have the buffers for a moment of shock. And don't use any excuses around, oh, it's difficult, we can't really go for more tax, because yes, you can. There is a lot that can be done to broaden the tax base, and a lot that can be done to reduce tax evasion and tax avoidance. Using technology, as some countries are doing, to chase the tax dollar when there is the foundation for that is a very good thing to do. Second, on the monetary policy side, we no more, as I said in the opening, we are no more in a place when you can look at the book of the central bank governor of the neighboring country and say, oh, they're doing this, I'll do the same, because you have to really assess domestically what are your inflationary pressures and do the right thing for your country.
While addressing the different nations on the African continent, the managing director of the IMF said it's important that African leaders prioritize the image of Africa, especially when it comes to fighting corruption, because not fighting corruption in one country will have a cascading effect on others.
But above all, make it so that the image of the whole continent changes, because now everybody suffers from wrongdoing, from corruption or for conflict in one country. It throws a shadow on the rest of the continent. And finally, like with ASEAN, deepen intra-regional trade and cooperation. Remove the obstacles to it. Sometimes they are infrastructure obstacles. The World Bank is working on reducing that infrastructure obstacle to growth and trade. Africa has so much to offer the world. Obviously, they have the minerals, the natural resources, the young population. I think a more unified, more collaborative continent can go a long, long way to be an economic powerhouse.
So in summary, uncertainty needs to be eliminated. Nations need to put forward policy buffers to shield them from the current volatility in the macroeconomic environment. The United States remains a key pillar of support for the IMF, and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's concerns are acknowledged and will be addressed. And finally, the IMF remains steadfast in providing fiscal support to nations that need it. Here in Washington, D.C. at the 2025 IMF World Bank Spring Meetings, for Arise News, Roda Sodiri.